Hi, welcome to Alberni Thrive. I'm Alicia LaRue.
And I'm Eric Plummer.
And today we'll be discussing food security and sustainability in the Alberni Valley in Port Alberni. I find it's a really exciting time to be part of Port Alberni. Lots of really neat things happening right now.
There's this critical period that Port Alberni is going through right now where it's trying to rediscover itself. And there's a lot of discussion about what works for Port Alberni, what's great about Port Alberni, what needs to be changed in Port Alberni.
Hi, welcome to Alberni Thrive. Today we'll be discussing food security and sustainability in the Alberni Valley in Port Alberni. So this is something that I'm really excited about because it seems like there's a lot of neat things that are going on in the Alberni Valley as far as food development. And there could be a lot more as well. So we've got some wonderful guests here to have discussions about this.
With its temperate climate and wealth of fertile soil, the Alberni Valley and the surrounding Vancouver Island boasts some of the best food production land in BC. But over the last couple of generations, the island's food sustainability has actually declined to an estimated 15% or less of what we actually consume, putting a reliance on importing from the mainland that generates vast quantities of carbon emissions. Today we're lucky to have some local individuals who have a wealth of ideas about this topic. We're lucky to be joined by Dan Schubart from the Alberni Valley Transition Town Society, City Councillor Chris Alamani, and Gary Swan, owner of Leda Organic Farm in the Alberni Valley. Thanks very much for coming here to join us.
Thanks for coming.
So I want to start out just talking about the possibility of having a regional diet where the food that you eat is actually produced in your immediate environment. And that's, for a lot of people, that's really not how we're living right now. Is this a possibility? Gary, you have a sustainable farm that you're operating in the Alberni Valley. Do you think that it's a possibility for the greater community to live in a more sustainable way?
It's definitely possible to grow, I would say, 95% of your food locally in this area. You have to change some of the things, and you might not have that many bananas and those sorts of things, but you can definitely be food self-reliant in the valley. Great climate for growing, and if we turned our attention to looking at some of the resources that we don't use, like the biodegradable wastes and the pickup of the garbage and stuff like that in the city and the region, we could make enough compost to go crazy. But we need a lot more people growing food. There's a handful of people that are doing it. Is just not going to cover it off. You need a lot more people doing it.
So what are the possibilities that aren't being tapped right now?
I think what we're looking at from the city's point of view is trying to encourage people to use their backyards to grow food, to have chickens, to have bees, that kind of stuff. But in the wider context in the region, to try to encourage more use of our fallow lands, and to try to have that generational shift. There's still a lot of farmers that have been there for a very long time, and there aren't necessarily people to take over for them. So that's another challenge that I think we face as a valley and as a wider society probably, to try to bring people into farming and to bring more of that online.
I think a huge issue is how reliant we are from getting our food elsewhere. Gary, you mentioned bananas and things like that are taken from very far away. Dan, would you be able to give us a bit of background on how our food sustainability has changed over the last couple of generations? You mentioned it might actually be down to 4%.
The stats that I've read most recently are that at one point the Alberni Valley furnished about 85% of its food, and that as of fairly recently we're down to about 4%.
When was the 85%?
In the early 50s.
Okay.
I read that too.
So within a span of a couple of generations. The other issue is what's in people's diet, because we tend also to eat a lot of processed food, a lot of prepared food. Fewer people are cooking, more people are either buying prepared food or dining out. And a lot of this is reliant on supplies that come from outside of the valley. There is, I think, an underutilization to a certain extent of what is produced, and there are choke points in the distribution system, I think.
Now, even like I find personally when I go and get my produce, the price is going up and it keeps going up. Now I'm wondering if locally, is that a good thing or a bad thing for local markets, like local farmers?
Well, you know, we've been doing growing food locally, organic food, and then more recently biodynamic, and we've kept pretty close watch on our cash flows. So you're looking at a man that makes $6 an hour. So it can't go down, the price of food. It can't go down. So it's a startling statistic, but and it doesn't really encourage people to get into it. But my point of view is that eventually, because of the climate issues and the use of carbon dioxide and fossil fuels and stuff like that, you're going to have to find a way of getting around that. And eventually we are going to have to produce more of our food here. It's going to be forced upon us.
I think too that from a consumer's perspective, it has gotten easier to go to a farmer's market because the prices have risen so fast in the grocery stores. You know, people can go to a farmer's market and pay what they need to pay for fresh eggs or produce or meats or whatever. We have everything available at the markets, even, you know, not enough a lot of the time. But I think that's something that we'll see is more people using those and more people creating their own food, having their own gardens, just from an economic standpoint.
In Port Alberni, within municipal limits, there is a lot of unused space, which, in my opinion, is actually a huge advantage of living here. And you can go out for a walk and come across a couple of fruit trees that aren't being managed, and if you knock on someone's door, you can come back with a couple of buckets of organic fruit. Is this something that you think the community can harness more so that we build a more sustainable way of producing and eating our own food?
Absolutely. I think I think that's sort of a holdover from when Port Alberni was really growing and a pioneer kind of city, and that ethic of growing your own food was there, and people planted fruit trees. So now we have those fruit trees still there. We have a great gleaning project that's come through Transition Towns and through Heather Schob at her farm, and I can't remember how many tons of produce that she's picked in the past couple of years, but it's a huge amount. And basically they work on a thirds basis. So the groups in town get a third of the produce, the pickers get a third, and the homeowners get a third.
So that basically is, can you elaborate on what the project is?
Yeah, the gleaning project is basically people going around and finding trees in the community, being contacted by people with trees who can't or don't want to pick that fruit, and they go ahead and they do that, and then they distribute the produce accordingly.
Perfect.
The gleaners are volunteers, and there's a coordinator who puts the picks together, gets the swarm to come and do the work.
That's one thing that blew my mind when I first moved here. You know, the back alley, my little one would be like, I'm hungry. I'm like, go pick some grapes. There's so many amazing fruit trees that are here. And it just goes to show the potential of this area. On that note, we're gonna go to a quick break. So we'll be right back.
Hi, welcome back to Alberni Thrive. Today we're talking about food sustainability in the Alberni Valley and on Vancouver Island. Something I wanted to touch on is if there is a generational shift going on in being aware of where our food comes from and how it's grown. Now, Gary, you're operating what is called a biodynamic farm, which sounds like a model of sustainability in itself, but I understand this isn't necessarily new. I think this model has existed for about 90 years. Is that correct?
That's right. It was introduced in Central Europe by a thinker or a seer in his day by the name of Rudolf Steiner. He probably maybe Waldorf school, and lots of facets that he worked on. But one of his big contributions was the lectures on biodynamic gardening or farming. And I think he gave a series of 8 lectures in 1924. And then there's been followers of that, for 90 years. There's a biodynamic association in North
What
America.
is it exactly though? Like,
Well,
why is it different than normal farming?
Well, because first of all, one of the tenets is to try and make the farm a self-contained unit. You look for the fertility on your farm from what you produce on your farm. You don't bring in things from outside. It's not a bunch of chemicals driven into your property. You find the techniques, and Steiner introduced them, of making your farm or your garden self-reliant, self-sustainable. He does that by marrying up what happens in the cosmos. So lots of our time is spent determining when to plant things and when to sow things with what they call a biodynamic sowing and planting calendar. And it does work. We started with that in about 2003, and after 5 years of following the calendar pretty carefully, we decided, well, we should try the other half of it, which is work with the earth. So the biodynamic movement makes very high quality compost in a very short period of time. It's done with a series of compost preparations that are like with a tablespoonful of 6 different preparations to do about 20 tons of compost.
Is this becoming, something that we're always hearing about in the news is global warming and climate change and how that is affecting the world in all sorts of different ways. Do you think that this model is actually becoming more relevant now than it has been in the past as people become more aware of the effects of climate change?
Well, I think it's more relevant now because if you look at the biodynamic associations, which I'm a member of, the North American one, there's a real influx of people getting involved in it and going to their seminars and their annual meetings and stuff like that. So a younger generation is doing it. Is it probably climate change something to do with it, right? If you got a self-contained unit as a farm, or the Alberni Valley is a self-contained unit, and it could happen, then you're not really dependent on outside sources or fossil fuels, which is the
Now,
big
you
thing.
mentioned that it could happen. Now the question is, how do we get more farmers in here to really utilize the Alberni Valley? Chris, what would you suggest is a good?
That's a great question,
Yeah.
and I don't know if I have a
big education component.
Yeah,
education
I think it
component?
really
Yes.
comes down to getting that message out there that we want that kind of activity in the valley for one, and just educating people about the benefits of having a local diet.
Yeah,
I think those are the 2 big ones.
I think it
Supporting.
also involves a change in mindset, and that's, when I grew up, I was kind of brought up to believe that you do one thing and you make your money by doing that one thing and you can take care of everything else by paying for it. But I think we're talking about something quite a bit different in that using your immediate environment to sustain yourself and being more independent in that way.
Yeah, I think that's a great point. People are going to need to be more mindful, I think, of consuming habits. That's kind of where we've come from is this notion that we can consume. We can go to Walmart, which has everything, including food now, rather than to have something that we can actually grow.
It's the mentality of he who has the most toys at death wins. There's another aspect to what Gary's doing, and I think some other people in the valley are very involved in, and that relates directly to climate change, is that smallhold farming along the lines of what Gary's doing sequesters carbon in the soil. And people have done projections that show pretty clearly that were we to engage on a mass scale in that sort of practice, instead of big chemical agribusiness, that we wouldn't have a carbon problem.
Yeah, the best thing you can do for the health of the planet and your own health is to eat local organic food, right? And I would go so far as to say it'd be even better if it was biodynamically produced, because it links you in with what's happening in your locality, right? the best food you can eat is something that's grown here locally, because it's got the same energies coming to that food as it's coming to you. Not something that's coming from Mexico or Chile or whatever. It's a whole different environment in the growth of that
Yeah,
thing.
when you're supporting the community, you're supporting local, right? And that's key to really all of us supporting each other to be self-sufficient. So if all of a sudden food prices go up the roof, or there's a disaster, who knows, we can all survive here. And I think that that's pretty neat. And the question is, again, I'm just going to keep bringing it up, is well, it's not necessarily a question, but I know a couple of the younger millennials, younger people have come to the valley here, and they've started up farms for like 150, 200,000. That's awesome. So I mean, the potential is there. So it's just really exciting to really I think it'd be nice like as far as the city, how have you brought any of this to the rest of the council and really been like, hey guys, we need to get more farmers in? Like, is there anything neat on the go in that sense, or?
Through the Food Security and Climate Disruption Committee that Gary and I are both on, I think that's the kind of thing that you'll see come from that committee. We had many recommendations come out of the report this past January, not specifically about food production, but just trying to get a ball rolling around food security and around climate change, and trying to just get that kind of going.
I want to talk about the risk involved in how much we depend on getting food from the mainland and faraway places. I've heard estimates that if all supply routes were to be shut off all of a sudden, the grocery store shelves would be bare pretty quickly. Dan, do you have any thoughts on this?
What I've read is that we have 3 days worth of food in the valley. And I know that there are many of us who have larders full of canning, that we dry fruits and vegetables and
Well, I know where I'm going. And the rest of you at home.
well, I think there are a lot of people in the valley who still hold those values, and part of it's the quality of the food, but part of it's emergency preparedness, and this, of course, ties in with the coastal response. That having local production definitely enhances the community resilience.
Right. Is this a real risk that should be at the forefront of people's minds? I mean, I've heard some people say that this is just paranoid thinking, that, we're always going to have those supply routes and it would take the end of the world for the grocery stores to run out of food. Is this something that people should be thinking about?
No, I think from a preparation point of view, it can be an earthquake, it could be a fire, it could be just a bad storm in the wintertime that could take out the road to the East Coast. There's lots of different reasons and I think ways that you would need that kind of resilience. So I think it's always a good idea to have that in the back of your mind, and the skills that you get from learning to can your own food or preserve food. Hunting. There's lots of people in town that love to go hunting. They have a deer and that sustains them in their freezer for the whole winter. So there's skills that are out there, and I think people can take advantage of programs that are in the city and offered by a lot of people in the community to gain those skills and become more resilient themselves.
I could add a little bit to that. As a person who has basically produced our own food for 20 years, it's pretty hard to push us around. If someone says, well, you should be, follow this line or that line. Well, okay, but we're going to do what we're going to do because we're not really dependent on many outside sources, right? So,
Gary, on your patch there might be other possibilities besides just food.
well, we got a fairly big forest too that we're working on. It's great for sequestering carbon. We should be doing more of that instead of cutting down trees. Pathetic, the size of trees that get cut down in this area.
They're like toothpicks.
Yeah, I mean, it's terrible.
No.
And, we need bigger trees, bigger trees.
But I think there's a lot of wildcraft knowledge,
There is that.
and that there are other food sources, that the forest is also a sustainable source of fiber, and farmland itself, if we didn't need it all for food, there are possibilities for growing flax or hemp as a fiber supply, and they're marvelously sort of broad. They can be used very broadly in a lot of contexts.
And the valley would be a perfect place for any of those crops, for sure.
Beyond food, we can talk a little bit about energy and fuel. I mean, in a lot of ways, Canada's kind of fallen behind other European countries in producing our own energy. Right here, we're very reliant on fossil fuels. What else can we do to change this habit that we have?
I think that's an opportunity that is going to come to the fore really quickly over the next decade or so, as the cost of solar panels, wind generation on a large scale, even things like run of river or small hydro, in creeks and streams, as long as the streams are running, that's all stuff that we haven't really had to think about, especially in BC, because we've had these huge central dams that give us all of our power. But along the resilience front, if you're making your own power and you're producing your own food and you have enough stored over the winter, you're pretty set. We have some challenges because it's not sunny all winter, but we have a very reliable grid in Canada. So if we can produce power ourselves, feed that into the grid, and use it when we need it, then that's a much more resilient system in the end.
Mm-hmm. So for myself, I find Port Alberni is very pro-industry, and that's all great, but I'm just wondering, what about changing this whole idea of industry into a sustainable industry? Because, the wind that we get here is incredible, even the canal too, the tidals. Is there any initiatives that are being set in place to make the city self-sufficient, not just an individual self-sufficient?
Yeah, I know the city has been eyeing the West Coast General solar installation that they just completed. That's a really exciting installation. I think that's something that the city's going to learn from. There's certainly opportunities, I think, for the city as a whole to take advantage of that. The wind, I've actually done a little bit of research in the past about the wind potential in the inlet, and it's really funny because it blows all summer long in the afternoon, but then it's dead calm in the winter.
Yeah.
So that's a challenge. But we're a couple hundred kilometers away from the West Coast. The region, the ACRD, as a whole, has vast potentials for all sorts of renewable energy, and I think that's an economic industry that we could certainly take more advantage of. And our local First Nations especially have already taken advantage of run of river and other technologies. So.
There's another example that is camped out pretty much on our doorstep. The Ocean Discovery Center in Sydney spent an extra $750,000 on their HVAC system by installing a heat exchanger out into Saanich Inlet, and it paid for itself in 5 years. So just by using the temperature differential of the water, they actually are.
And it pays off.
Yep.
Yeah, and it can create jobs too as well.
Absolutely.
So to me, it seems like, a bit of a no-brainer, especially, it's hard to say where Trudeau goes, but definitely in Paris, he said by 2050 that he wants to be, zero emissions. So this is something that it'd be neat for Port Alberni to look into more so. Because we have tons of potential.
If those targets, and they're not, the targets that are there now they need to be strengthened.
Yes.
In order to actually achieve the goals of the climate conference. So there's going to have to be a lot of money to all of the municipalities across Canada to try to achieve those goals.
Yeah.
And I think you'll see a lot of that. And that's going to create a lot of jobs because people are going to have to fix up their homes, they're going to have to create the energy, all sorts of stuff. So I think there's huge opportunity there.
Gary, what's your vision for a more sustainable future here in the Alberni Valley?
Well, I think, first of all, I think we should be growing our own food as much as we can. I think we should do it in a sustainable way. Biodynamics is a proven 90 years worth of historical experience with serious people doing it. I think we should have the regional district actually make compost from the biodegradable waste that's going on here. I've lobbied for that for a long time, but sort of pulled back a bit. Now we do demonstrations. When we build a compost heap, we have 20 people come out and say, how do you help us do it? And then they take it off and do it at their place. So eventually we're going to have a mushroom effect or a growing effect of people making biodynamic compost in their backyards and stuff. Energy-wise, well, that's something I'm not that familiar with. I mean, we burn firewood for our main source of energy. Our most expense that we buy off of the farm is fossil fuels to keep the farm going. It'll have to be another generation, maybe Chris's age or my son's age, which I think are similar, that figures out how to run our tractor on something that doesn't come from Alberta or wherever. I'm not going to do it.
What are your thoughts on the future, Chris, in terms of being a more sustainable community?
I think very much like Gary, we'll need to rely more, I think, on each other as a community, and take our own initiative to create our own food, create our own energy, and create our own employment. I think that's going to be the real foundation of what a sustainable future will look like. Will really be that community, rather than relying on things coming from far away and supplying us. We'll be supplying ourselves, and that's what I see from it.
So are we headed in the right direction, or do you think that there's more improvement needed in changing people's mindsets?
Both. I think the seeds have been sown, and there are people who are getting on board. Unfortunately, some of us are getting older and will be looking to hand it off. And there are a lot of people who are very comfortable with what exists now. And my sense is that dialogue needs to be extended.
Great. Well, thank you guys so much for being on the show. Very, very enlightening. And I look forward to getting in more people into this area to really utilize its full potential, because that's what it has.
Yeah,
so,
definitely.
yeah, thanks for viewing it at home. Feel free to check out our website, www.albernithrive.com, and definitely support your local farms. Eat local. It's way better for you. Till next time.
See you later.